Before we get started with the episode, I want to quickly call out a technical issue that we experienced at the end of the first session of this episode. The issue actually was just that the video and audio of myself, Ron here, was actually not showing up. So we've tried our best to work around it, but we apologize for the inconvenience. This was a great episode to record, so we hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Studs. I'm Alex Stud.
And I'm Ron Stud.
And Ron, for episode 58, we have LaVonte Stewart with us tonight. How are you doing, LaVonte?
I am great, guys. Alex and Ron, thanks for having me on. Excited to be
Happy
here.
to have you on.
Yes, we're very excited to have you on the show. You have been we were introduced to you through Dan Pogo, a guest last season, and so we're so happy to have you on. We're excited to talk to you about some really cool stuff that you're working on, and so we're going to dive into that in a minute. Of course, before we do that, Ron and I have a tradition around here. We've embraced since pretty much the beginning of the show. We always have a toast to honor our guest, LaVonte Stewart, also by honoring the official spirit of Between Two Studs, my lord. So we're going to have a toast to you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to that. My imaginary shot. Oh, wait, I could have had a real one.
Now,
I've got some Espanola.
now let me ask you
If
this.
it's nearby, you can go get it.
LaVonte, do you like Malort? I know Chicagoans, it's very polarizing.
I hate it. But when in Rome, do as the Romans. So if I'm up in Wrigleyville and I'm hanging out with some of my Cubs buddies like
Yeah.
Bleacher Jeff and My Tie Guy and Rob Leitz, and if I'm hanging out with those guys and Danny Rocket and Crawley, yeah, I'll definitely go over to the bar to Nisei Lounge with them and grimace and take a couple.
I love it.
Well, and what's cool too is I've actually been to Nisei Lounge, and Alex, I know you've been there too.
Mm-hmm.
We had a wonderful time while there. So shout out to them for being also certainly a Malort bar in Wrigleyville. So cool place.
Oh yeah. They're really cool guys. Jay Westbrook is actually a good friend of mine. He's a bartender there, and he's from South Shore. He's doing really awesome stuff in the city of Chicago. He's one of very few black brewers. So that's what he does for a living, is he brews beer. And funny, I think it was last summer we teamed up with him and journalist Shakia Taylor, who now writes, I think, for the Chicago
Wow.
Tribune. And I think Saber, she does for Saber too. But they teamed up, and Shakia wrote this amazing story about Minnie Minoso and Ernie Banks. And Jay created a beer, and it was called Summer of 54. And so it was a tribute to both men, both being the first black baseball players to integrate Chicago's pro baseball.
Wow.
So, of course, Ernie, Mr. Cub, and then Minnie, the Rocket on the South Side, right? And so those guys actually had a relationship, given their unique circumstances, being the only two black ball players in professional baseball in the city of Chicago. So that happened in the summer of 1954, roughly. And so that's what the beer, Jay, dedicated the beer. Shakia wrote the amazing story that detailed it all, and then tied it to us at Lost Boyz and what we're doing with black youth in Chicago through the sport of baseball.
Wow. I
awesome.
had no idea about that piece of history.
Actually, you can Google it. I think the articles are
yeah. You know what? What we'll do is when we post this episode, we'll share the link to that article. That actually sounds really cool. So so it's interesting. You kind of did a little precursor of what we're going to be talking about today. You're talking about baseball and the amazing work that you're doing with Lost Boyz. But before we get into that, we really want to get to know you, LaVonte, as a person, kind of your backstory, before we talk about some of the good work that you do. So, I know you were born on Chicago South Side, and I know you excelled academically in school. You ended up attending Hampton University in Virginia. what do you credit for your success
Yeah.
in academically as a youth, and what was it like leaving Chicago for the first time, going to Virginia?
Well, I absolutely, guys, credit my parents, hands down. My parents, my grandmothers, my grandfathers. Um, so I was a little bit of a different story when it kind of comes to the socioeconomic dynamics that often surround Black families, Black folks in major metropolises. You often, unfortunately, hear a lot of rags to maybe not even riches, but people that come from really hard and harsh circumstances. Well, I didn't. I came from a very groomed, well groomed, upper middle class family. My mom was a Chicago public school
Hmm.
teacher, special education, Democrat. My dad was one of only two Black employees at Standard
Hmm.
Oil, which had its headquarters in
You know.
Chicago at that for a very long time, of course. And he was a computer programmer. And he's a Republican,
Mhm.
Oh,
basically.
that's interesting.
Um, so my siblings and yeah, very interesting, boy. The conversations in that house. Um, but my siblings and I, we were all raised to really place an extreme value on education from both of our parents, especially with our mom being a
Sure.
teacher. It was very hard to come in there with a D or an F or misspelling words or any of that, right? You're gonna hear it
Mm.
all the time. So our matriculation was always a really high quality private schools, Catholic systems, elementary all the way through college, private schools, except me. I'm like the kind of the screw up. I'm the oldest. And so I was the one that made the most mistakes. My siblings, they graduated straightforward, very simply from every school. Me, I managed to almost get kicked out of almost every school. But somehow, I was able to kind of finish things. So, that's what I came from in terms of academic our academic prowess. So I got that from my parents. Hampton, it really wasn't even, excuse me, honestly, my first choice. So I was looking at some other schools, um, and I think I may have even been looking at Jackson State, some other places. All I knew was I wanted to play football and I wanted to play baseball, and if I could, I wanted to wrestle. Those were my three favorite sports in high school. I also dabbled in soccer for a
Oh,
little bit.
wow.
But football, I just really had this infinity for football, and I don't know why. I was like this really little guy. Baseball, I had grown up playing since like 7 years old. My mom put me in local little league, South Shore Little League. I sucked, but I got better in high school because of one of my best friends, Joe Stewart, who ended up being one of my co-founders with
Oh,
Lost
cool.
Boyz,
Wow.
which I'll tell you a little more about that story a bit later. But yeah, so Hampton, my one of my other best friends, we had gone to elementary school together, we had gone to high school together, and so then he mentioned that he was going to Hampton University, and I knew about Hampton. I started looking more into it. I recall seeing it on a very popular TV show in the Black community back then, A Different World, which highlighted
Yeah.
all of these HBCUs and life in the HBCUs, and so Hampton was one that you would often see or hear about in it. So I checked it out, and I'm like, man, this school is kind
Yeah.
of dope. So I told my mom, I'm like, well, I want to go with Andre. I want to go to Hampton, and she's like, well, okay, it's in Virginia. Her twin brother lived there with his family. He left Chicago decades ago and moved to Virginia, Chesapeake, and became kind of a country boy. And and so it was perfect for her because I wouldn't be
Yeah.
alone. Here's her brother there with his wife and kids. So for her, it's like, you know what? This is actually good. Go ahead. So that's how the choice became Hampton.
Ah.
So I got there, no scholarship money, took my high school helmet with me and my shoulder pads, and immediately I got to campus and I started sniffing around for the football team. So I found out about tryouts and all of that stuff, and eventually, I made the team as a walk on, and I was excited because I didn't think I was gonna make it, man. I was like the littlest thing out there. It was probably like 120 pounds, dripping wet, and it
Wow.
was like, yo, who let the little brother out on the field, right? It's like all these guys are like huge, and I'm like, oh my god. But it became a labor of
Yeah.
Wow,
love.
that's so cool. Well, it's interesting because obviously I was researching you, and I was like, wow, so kid from the South Side ends up going to Virginia. What a culture shock that must have been. But it was nice. I didn't realize you had family already in the state, so that must have made things a lot easier.
Yeah, it did. It was, and it was in the beginning. It was really helpful for my mom because she knew how I had an affinity to go off the rails in life. Like I'll be doing really good, and then all of a sudden I'll just start screwing up. And she's like, "Okay, my brother is there, so maybe he can kind of keep this
Yeah.
contained." And and I mean, it was really trippy because back then we didn't have TSA and all of that stuff, and so I actually got on the airplane and I had a 20 Pro Handle 25 in my
What?
suitcases, right? And so I got through screening because screening wasn't what it is
Yeah.
now. Yeah. So I get down here, and so my mom already knows I have it. She kind of knows I have it. She's been trying to get a hold of it. And so she tells my uncle, she alerts him. And so I get down there and they pick me up from the airport, and he gives me a big hug and a kiss. And hey, nephew, I haven't seen you since you was little, and da da da. Now, by the way, your mom told me you brought that gun down here. Give it over here to me. And true story. And the funny thing is, he still has my gun
In
to this day. I have not
2023.
retrieved my gun. He's still got my gun. So for my mom, right away, I'm like, oh, this is gonna work out in her
Right.
favor. And so I would spend my weekends, I would go back and they come and get me, and I go to Chesapeake and hang out. And so this guy turned rural. So I get there and he's got this little house in the country, and he's got, some land. And I see chickens and other things, and I'm like, oh, what the hell? But it was actually so
Yeah.
peaceful and serene, and the people, their neighbors, were like relatives to his wife, and so it was a big
Woohoo.
family kind of block, if you could call it a block. Um, so immediately it was great because I kind of had another village
Yeah.
building right away. They were excited. I was from the big city, a couple of cute girls there that were my auntie's nieces, no relation to me. So, I liked it. Pretty country
Yeah.
girls. They were really nice. So, Virginia became, they say Virginia's for lovers, and I fell in love with that state like right away, and I was all over that place. Um, Another short fact was I came into contact with Allen Iverson and ended
Oh,
up kind of
No
befriending
way.
Iverson
friends with
during that time.
AI.
I'm sure the guy doesn't even remember me at this point. Yeah. So I actually was like trying to date his sister for a little bit. He had a younger sister, but or older sister. I don't know. I was older than the guy. So but the reason I came in contact
Yeah.
with him is um, the college was trying to recruit him for football and basketball, but the football team was trying to recruit him. So somehow I lucked into the couple of guys that got tasked with trying to
Do
connect with
whatever
this
it
guy.
takes. Recruit this
And the
kid.
timing couldn't,
Yeah.
yeah. And it didn't end up working, of course. He selected Georgetown, then he had that crazy incident right before everything, before he went off to college, the bowling alley incident with the chair throwing stuff, and we're trying to get a kid all that time. But yeah, so that's a funny story I like to mention. And again, I'm pretty sure, and his nickname is Bubba Chuck. That's what his family called him. But
Didn't
Well,
know
it's
that.
it's funny because
I'm sure he wouldn't remember
so
me now.
we lived. Our family moved to northern Delaware in the early 2000s. So right when he
It was
went to
hot.
the NBA finals, and so we used to
Yeah.
watch him. I mean, just such an unbelievable athlete, 76ers. So that's really cool.
Oh yeah. And I got a lot of great athlete stories like that. I actually grew up two doors down from Mr. Crossover himself, Tim Hardaway,
Wow.
Senior.
Whoa.
Yeah. So grew up on that block for years. Tim is like a longtime friend and family friend. I haven't seen him and talked to him in years, but that was another kind of cool
Wow.
one.
Pretty cool.
So let me get this straight. So you go to Hampton, which is in many ways it was a connection through somebody else that they were already going there.
Yeah.
You ended up playing football as a walk on, played cornerback, right? And then you ended up becoming a
Yes.
two-time CIAA champion as a Pirate.
Yep. And a one-time Sheridan Black national champ, and there's the ring.
Wow.
And what's so dope about this is there's a podcast by John Hanson here, Block Club Chicago, and a written
Yes,
story.
I read it.
And I think Maxwell Evans is in on this stuff. So it's crazy, right? Crazy, amazing story. So I just retrieved this ring a couple of years
Please
ago,
tell us the
when we
story.
took a trip to Kansas
Please
City,
tell the story.
Missouri.
It's a great one.
Oh my God! So I'm gonna try to give you the condensed version.
You can go to
So
long version.
I was a serious airhead, man. I'm gonna say another word. Since I work with kids, I'm gonna leave the profanities out. But I was a different kind of a-hole or a-head. Um, and so I took this whole Chicago street gang mentality with me to college because I had this kind of duplicitous personality. In the daytime, I was this great student who, you know, got on the field of sport and was committed to my teams and to my education and this and that. And then at nighttime, you know, I was trying to be tough and cool and fit in to what was beginning to overwhelm my community by the end of the 80s. You know, the crack era kicked in. And so I'm old enough to have remembered it happening, have remembered seeing the change in the Black community. Man, I'm telling y'all, it's like one of those movies where the toxins or the poisons hit the happy land and then the whole
Wow.
thing turns dark. And that's like what happened to Black communities around America, honestly. And a lot of folks don't realize that. They just think, well, it's always been like that. No, 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 no. Black communities, we didn't have a lot of the troubles that we have now. And, you know, we stuck together a lot more, and we made it such an amazing ecosystem for everyone. But that drug epidemic happened, and so there was a shift, and that shift impacted kids tremendously because, yeah, the men that were guarding the community that started kind of going away, and it allowed for all of this antisocial behavior to start happening, all of this negative stuff to start happening. And so, being like 12 and 13, a Black kid in a Black community, you were almost forced to join a gang or damn near just stay in the house because it was always coming at you, no matter what you were doing. And you could be like, man, I'm not into that. I'm a student. I'm an athlete. Now, back then, athletes got passes, but yeah, it became so much pressure on the average kid, and I got caught up in that pressure. And the other thing is, it seems kind of exciting a little bit, you know, that fast life and kind of. And so anyway, I got sucked into it, and so I had been doing a lot of things I shouldn't have been doing by the time I got 17, 18, and time to go to college. And so I go down, you know, braids, towel coats. I don't know if you guys remember the popularity of towel coats. They were literally coats, jackets that were made out of like beach towels. It became a really
Oh,
popular thing
yeah,
in
okay.
the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And it would be like cartoon towels.
I
So, you
remember
know,
the cartoon
so
towels.
everybody's
Yeah.
looking at me crazy because this is yeah, it's a straight Chicago thing. So I'm down here in a jacket made out of towels with a hood on it with braids, you know, my little pearl handle 25. And so I start off pretty good. Then I start making friends, like I always do. And then I gotta prove that I'm so hood and this and that. And so I start getting distracted again, man. Between sports and trying to hang out and be a bad boy down in Virginia, I eventually got kicked out of school by my third year. And it was academically. I was so into football because I had to start doing really well. And I was at the point that season coming, I probably would have been starting. I had worked my way up on the depth chart from number
Mm-hmm.
16. When I came in, there were like 15 other
Oh my
cornerbacks on that
God.
team. And I just worked my way up, dude. I was first one at practice. I was the last one to leave. I would ask, you know, current players, corners, defensive backs to stick around and work out with me. It was crazy, man. I would go in the gym when we had workout time and everybody else is just hitting the iron. Boom. I go to the bench press and dude, I could barely do a 45 plate on each side. Yeah, I was embarrassed, but I was like, forget it, dude. I'm gonna, you know, throw them
Yeah, you got to start
35s on there
somewhere.
then, you know, the
Yeah.
25s and the 10 or whatever. Right. And then, but I started seeing progress in myself. I picked up about 20 pounds of pure muscle mass thanks to Coach Taylor and Coach Rose and, you know, that coaching crew. I was already a really slim guy anyway, you know, not a really big guy, but I just became way more solid. I was already fast, quick, agile, and it just improved everything. So yeah, I just worked, man, and I kind of started forgetting about the school part, the whole reason I'm really there. So between and then my popularity changed. I went from nobody who couldn't get a girl in the first couple of months of being there, no girls are giving me any attention, to once I got myself where I wanted to be by that second year, it was like, oh man, that guy's really on the football team. I'm walking around with 300-pound linemen I
Right.
know every day, hanging out, doing stuff, and I'm their guy. So I started getting known then on the campus. And so now I'm partying. We move off campus. My roommates are from New York, one from Long Island, one from Brooklyn. And so we move off campus. We convince our parents this is a smart thing to do, which is probably the dumbest thing I did. And yeah, it just went crazy from there because, no more study nights. It was like party night. Everything was party, 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 party,
Well,
party.
and I have to
Then I had to get a job because I
stop you
had
there
to
for
pay
one
bills.
second. So I've been to Hampton with work related issues, right? So the thing that we need
Right.
to paint the scene for all of our audience listening is you're right in Virginia Beach, right? Like you're right on the coast. And the
Yes.
beach, man,
Yes.
if you want to party, you can party really good, right?
Dude, you know it.
Right?
And Hampton itself,
It's so beautiful, that
it's
area.
called the home by the bay because right on the campus itself is the
Yeah.
bay of I think the Chesapeake River
Yep.
or something, one of the
Yep.
bodies of water. And so literally we could go out behind our dormitories and you can sit right out on the grass and there's the bay and there's boats. It was one of the most beautiful things I've
Yeah.
ever seen. And so I come out at night, especially when I first got there, and I go take a walk or something, and maybe tripping over bodies because there's people rolling around in the grass out there, man. It's like, whoa. So yeah, it was a beautiful campus. And the other thing about Hampton is I didn't understand that then, but I understood it after I got there. It is a very elite Black university in the sense of more affluent Black folks send their kids there, dignitaries, politicians, So there were all these folks who were the children of really important Black folks. And I didn't even realize that until I got down there and, maybe started dating some of the girls and then
You're
finding
like,
out
oh,
like,
you're
oh,
the
your
daughter of
dad's a
Oh.
congressman or
Oh.
right,
Yeah.
right. Your dad's a diplomat from Jamaica. Oh, okay. So yeah, it was just kind of it was a beautiful experience though, right? Besides me screwing up, being exposed to such affluence and wealth among other Black folks, that felt really good to see that such a thing really, really existed outside of rappers and athletes.
Yeah. Was that? Let me ask you. I mean, was the fact that it was an HBCU, was that appealing to you? Is that something you were looking for? I mean, obviously, I know Hampton itself became happenstance because of the friend, but was that something that you were looking for, that connection? You said you grew up in a Black community, on the South Side. So going into the college, was that something you were looking for, or it just happened to be that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Alex, because now at 47, almost 48, damn near 50. I look at life, I'm able to look back at life
Mm-hmm.
differently. And so for me, I think what I didn't recognize early was, but I do now, is that I had such an affinity for what Black folks we call the struggle. And so, simply put, what the struggle is Black life from a historical perspective. Um, you know, from slavery on forward to
Sure.
civil rights and through. So I was always a student of all of that stuff, right? Like the average kid was into I was just into other things too. And so like I would sit at home reading Frederick Douglass speeches or, biographies on Harriet Tubman or W.E.B. Du Bois or Booker T.
Who is an alma
Washington.
mater of Hampton
And
University, Booker T.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And one of the co-founders with the captain. But the Colonel Captain. But I always had an affinity for this stuff. And then, civil rights, and just always felt like I personally belonged with that type of group of leaders. Now, what audacity of me to think of myself in a category as such people like that, as an MLK or a Malcolm X or, any of those kind of folks. But that was the stuff that I was really identifying with, because I think the what I can now identify as trauma, but a secondary trauma, was that the impact of watching the change of my community with the drug epidemic, watching the community change over, and watching the culture change, and watching all of these things change. I think it really pushed me more into looking into that. And then honestly, one thing that Black people don't often talk about anyway is our lack of ethnic and cultural identity. Most of us, we can't identify our family crest because we don't have one, right? Records don't even allow us to trace back. Now, fast forward, you got all these DNA tests and all this other stuff going on. So now people can kind of try to figure out where they come from, where their roots are. And so remember, I was going to school later in life, by high school, with all kind of kids from different backgrounds. And so kids would be having these conversations about their great 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 grandfather coming from Ireland and da 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 da. And so I didn't know any of that. So my only connection into who I was these stories and books and TVs that didn't even directly connect to my family. So for me, I think that impacted how I looked at going to an HBCU. I wanted that Black experience. I just really was at a point in my life right then where I was trying to figure out who I was as a person and who I was as a Black American. What did that really mean?
Yeah, that makes complete sense, and I appreciate you sharing that. So,
yeah, and it was a great experience.
Well, so I know I want to make sure, because I interrupted, but I want to make sure we get back on track, which is the story of the ring. So.
Oh yeah, let me finish the ring. Yeah, because I would do that, dude. I'll start digressing. All right, so I'm starting to get into all of this trouble. I get kicked out of school by junior year. I'm devastated. We had won this already, man. I had the ring. We had custom track suits that were made with our name on it, with the CIAA titles, the Sheridan National title. Then we got bumped up to, right before that, we got bumped up to D1 AA. So we came out of being D2. We went up into a whole new level. So it was going to be amazing. It was always scouts walking around. And I really believed, for some reason in my head, that I could play at the next level. And that was my goal. Like, I really wanted to try that. But then that happened. And so I had to lower my head, tuck my tail, come on back to Chicago, to my parents, who were really disappointed. My dad might have not talked to me the first week or two I got home. Like, probably didn't like looking at me. So now I'm back at home and trying to figure it out. But actually, my parents weren't here. I came back to Chicago, and I stayed with my grandma, because what happened was, during my time at Hampton, my parents moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, because my dad's job, Standard Oil, relocated their headquarters to Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay.
And he was fortunate enough to get kept. They kept him. So, they did the whole relocation thing for him, helped him get a house, helped him sell the house here in Chicago. And, he took the family there. So I'm back in Chicago for a little bit, and I'm going crazy. I'm running rampant. I'm doing all kind of crazy stuff. My grandmother's like, you going to Oklahoma with your parents. So they shipped me down to Oklahoma.
Another cultural shock,
now I get to
I'm
Oklahoma.
sure.
Oh my God, it was. But it was cool. I met some really cool folks. I got a job at the dry cleaners, saved up my money, got this really cool 1975 Caddy coupe I love, put some, really flashy rims and sounds in it, powder blue, and then bought me another one, because I was able to I didn't have to pay no bills.
Yeah.
It was my parents, right? Save all my little dry cleaners money. So now I'm going to the community college there. And of course, I'm missing football. I'm like, I'm relapsing, right? I'm going through it.
That was an activity that kind of kept you focused. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think what to do with myself. I'm still working out. I'm playing pickup football here and there with like high school kids that are like out practicing. Remember, I'm not that old yet. I'm like 19 by this point, probably, or so. So I still got 19, almost 20 maybe. So still got a lot of time left, a lot of eligibility. So I'm looking, and finally I hear from this school. And it's NAIA, but I'm like, whatever. It's Missouri Valley College. So I'm like, okay, small school, small town. And they're like, yeah, we'll give you a double scholarship, football
Wow.
and baseball. I'm like, yeah. So my mom, she really didn't want me to go though. She was like, man, something about Missouri. I don't really like Missouri. It was the last state to give up
Mm.
slavery, da 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 da. I don't know about Missouri. So I'm like, nah, that don't matter. Slavery don't matter. And it's all right. So I go to Marshall, Missouri, a little bitty town, like dead center between St. Louis and Kansas City. A small campus, small town. Not really thinking though. So I go down there with these flashy Cadillacs, with my whole Chicago swag, and then I do the same stuff over that I did in Hampton. I get in, I start playing ball, I get on the team, having a couple of few good games. First, that season is starting off really well for me. Now think about it, I'm kind of advanced compared to them coming
Yeah.
from this bigger D2 that's now a D1, this powerhouse of black football. Ranking up there, Hampton, Grambling, these were the places. Um, so I'm down here doing really well. Again, I start slipping in my classes. I move off campus again, and then I create another set of friends, and I basically make my own gang. And so now I'm into everything else, selling drugs, all this other stuff, and I'm not paying attention to school anymore. Now I'm showing up to football practice, and I'm high, been smoking weed or something, and coaches are like looking at me. So I'm really, as Chicago say, I'm tweaking. Um, so a young lady that was a friend of mine, she gets into this situation. It's kind of race based. Some young guys, white guys, were like chasing her in the pickup truck and calling her niggers and all this stuff. And so she comes, tells me, and so me trying to be the tough guy I was. I'm like, okay, we're gonna go over there and talk to him, or go kick some ass. And so we go to their house and walking up the driveway, and apparently they've already went home, and word probably got around fast I
Wow.
was coming. Small town. And so they told their parents, and so dad comes out, family comes out as we're walking up, and dad pulls out his gun and tells me get my nigger ass off their property. And so at that point I'm floored. I had never, as segregated as Chicago is, I'm not sure I had consciously experienced much racism.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a thing that I saw on a daily basis in Chicago in the 80s or 90s. So I was like, yo, what's this? I've never been called that except by people that look like me, and it hits different. Right. So I kind of flip out and I'm like, okay, I'm going to show them what one of those is. And so I go home and I get this rifle I had legally bought from Walmart because at that age, you didn't have to be 21 to buy like hunting equipment, rifles, and certain type of guns. You could get them directly, out of Walmart. And so I bought this rifle. I tell this young lady that I'm, it's cool with. I tell her to drive back past. I'm just gonna scare him. I'm just shooting the air. So I rode past. Nobody's out there. The family alone went back in the house. Only thing out there is the dog chained to the tree. And we ride past, and she's going super fast, like at least 30 miles an hour. You can't do a drive by at 30 miles an hour. And so I just fire like 5 rounds out the window up in the air. I don't hit the house. I don't hit the dog. I don't hit any person. Um, so I'm thinking, okay, that's done and over. Well, now a couple of days later, I'm hearing, hey man, police are looking for you. The sheriff's office, they're looking for you. I'm like, looking for me for what? And like, that shooting, that thing the other night. I'm like, oh. So it's small town. I'm able to just avoid them. I'm still going to school every
Wow.
day. I'm ducking them. They can't even get me and pull me over. And so I start talking to my grandmother about it, though, and I'm like, you know, and I'm like, well, I'm just gonna come home. I'm a book a plane ticket, and I'm gonna come home, and I'll send somebody else down, send my cousins down here to get my property, my cars, and all that stuff. And my grandmother talks sense into me. She says, no, If it wasn't that serious, just go in there, face the music, tell the truth. It'll be okay. You didn't hurt anybody, da 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 da. And, you were responding to this or that. So it'll work. So I always take my grandmother's advice. And so I called them and said, hey, heard you all are looking for me. I said, yeah, come down and talk to us. Okay. I should have been thinking. Go down to talk to them. And well, basically, I didn't walk back out that building until 5 years later. Well, not that building, but I walked in. They charged me with multiple, they were trying to charge me with multiple charges of attempted murder.
Attempted murder.
Yes, aggravated first degree assault. They just tried to make me sound like this crazy Chicago drive-by shooter, and they made everybody in the house, including the dog, a potential victim. And then to make it worse, a lot of the kids that I was cool with that had become a little gang, they followed me back over there the first time in a couple of cars when we thought it was going to be a fight. And so the state's attorney arrested all those kids and scared the hell out of them and made them all turn state's evidence against me.
They basically,
so now my deposition
they basically
is like
were told,
this tall,
hey, turn on LaVonte and you'll be okay.
or you're going to jail. Right. And there was no real threat to those kids. They would not have gotten in any trouble. They didn't really do anything. Whatever it was, it would have been like back in Chicago, that would have been an unlawful use of a weapon, and that would have been it. It would have either been probation or it would have ended up being dropped. So my mom puts the house up. We get this lawyer, small town. The courts aren't respecting him. So we have to continue to change venues. So now I'm moving around the state of Missouri from county jail to county jail every few months over the course of like a year or so, trying to get a fair trial. Because I'm telling you, it's not getting fairer, it's getting worse, right? Because I'm just moving from one small town to another small town, and each town probably has less of a black population, so I have less of a chance of getting a fair shake here. All they hear is black guys shot at white people. It ain't happening. So eventually, finally, they come with a reasonable plea bargain to my lawyer. They've come with a bunch of them over the year. And they finally say, okay, 10 years for second degree assault, and then 7 years for second degree assault, and 3 years for armed criminal action. So a 10-year total sentence. And they say, oh, well, nobody was hurt. No property was damaged. Nobody was injured.
21.
Like 20 years of, well, by this point in jail,
and you're looking at
21,
10 years.
Looking at 10 years. So, again, I'm not showing that lawyer any respect. My mom is constantly burning through money. I had already burned through money I had. I turned over all my money I had first, kind of saved up a few $1,000s and told her to use that. I'm not thinking these legal expenses are getting that bad, but she had to leverage her house, dude. She really had to take like out a second mortgage and pay for this lawyer. It was crazy. And then her coming down a couple of times, to visit and to be at court hearings. And I was just so despondent, man. I was young. I was in this place. I'm like, damn. So finally, I'm just tired, like the systems do here, and it wears people down. And you accept these plea bargains because you just want to get this stuff over with. You're tired of living in limbo with your life living in limbo. So I accept the 10 years because the way they broke it down was like, thinking I'd be out maybe in a year or so or something. No, not the case. So the armed criminal action is equivalent to, like in Illinois, an X case. X's came with mandatory minimums. So that 3 years was what I had to serve. That was the mandatory minimum on an armed criminal action charge. So I had to do 3 years before I was eligible for parole. Then it took another 2 years basically to get parole because I was not from Missouri and I did not want to parole to a halfway house in Missouri. I had no family in Missouri. I was not going to stay there. So I had to get what's called an interstate compact to be able to come back home to Chicago with my mom. So, yeah, I basically came home in 2001. That whole thing, I think, happened in 90. Did it happen in 97, 96, 97? Yeah, 96, like 96, right? Yeah, everything happened in like 96. And so I didn't come home to Chicago until like 2001. So by that point, I'm 25 years old. And during the course of that, all of this ring was in my house because I wasn't wearing it like I'm wearing it now. I was wearing it, but I had took it off and it was in, on my dresser or something. And so my so-called friends, they ended up taking all of my property, my cars, all of the stuff I had. My family couldn't get down here and get all of that stuff. And this was one of them, one of the things. So like all of my evidence of Hampton and my
Basically,
accolades to
all of your
Hampton, there is no proof
possessions
any
were
of
just
that ever
completely
happened.
taken from you while you were in jail.
Just gone, right. Well, I mean, eventually it was going to have to happen anyway because I was going to have to clear out the apartment. I couldn't keep paying for an apartment. I didn't have money and I wasn't living in it. So my parents had to come to clean it out anyway. And it was like it already got ransacked and they took a bunch of stuff. And this was one of the things. And I was so upset because I love this ring. I worked my butt off to earn this ring. And I didn't know. I had an idea which one of my so-called friends took it. And that was it. It disappeared. And so now I'm getting ready, 2 summers ago, to take a group of kids. This is our first out of town trip, big group trip. And we're going to Kansas City, Missouri to visit the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and my good friend Bob Kendrick, who's the president. And we're going to visit the American Jazz Museum, some other stuff, take in a
Yeah.
Royals game, Royals and Sox, and then try to meet up with the kids from the MLB Youth Academy there in Kansas City. And 3 days before we were prepared to leave, we get an email in our general info box. And so one of the board members or somebody forwards it to me, and they're like, yo, read this. Actually, I think it was my sister because she was like the board chairman at the time. And I was floored, guys. I read this email and they're talking about they found this ring. And so the guy had found the ring and, he says, did you own a ring from Hampton University, a football championship ring and da 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 da? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. He says, like, can you describe it? Dude, I haven't seen this ring in 25 years. I describe it to the T though. And he's like, yeah, that's your ring. And I was amazed. But even more amazing is the story to how and where it was found. So a little boy walking with his granddad in a park found it. Of all places, he thought it was a rock. And for some reason, it caught his attention and he ran and grabbed it and figured out it was a ring and said, look, granddad. And the granddad thought it was a rock or something. He said, no, it's a ring. But he found it on the foul line of the baseball field.
Wow.
So for me, like I said in the story, now think about it. At this point, I had been doing Lost Boyz probably like 14, 15, 13 years of my life or something at that point, and working a regular job and stuff. But I had invested all my heart, all my passion into Chicago's youth and through baseball. And baseball became my church. I started preaching the gospel of the leather ball. And of all places for this to be found was in a baseball field.
Unbelievable.
On the foul line. And so for me, I always tell people now that was full circle and it was closure to all of that trauma in my life prior to all of that. Because I've always been a follower of Christ. That was one thing. I always believed in God. Religion, spirituality was passed to us by the women in our family. And I wholeheartedly believed in this invisible God and his son who supposedly died on this cross. I really believe that stuff because that's what faith is, believing in something that you have no evidence in. And I lived my life that way, but I still was a big sinner. But I always believed in God, had what I thought to be a close relationship with God. But then it really got closer because for me, that was confirmation that not only was I doing everything right with my life and I was on the path I was supposed to be on, but that I was forgiven for all of that other stuff I had done before in my life, that I had paid my price for it, and that my slate was clean. Yes,
Right. It's the validation that it all came full
exactly.
circle. That the more that you
Yes,
give, right, by helping out others, it comes full circle and returns to you in the form of that ring.
exactly. And so that ring for me was because it was quietly, it was a yearning of my heart. I always wanted that thing back because when I talk and tell my Hampton stories, the Iverson and all that stuff, everybody's like, "Oh, that guy's lying." Man, dude, look how little you are. You didn't play no college football. Right. And it was hard to find proof. It's like one little piece of proof I could find over the internet. There was like one document that shows like all of the
You're like, that's
rosters
me, right
over
up
time.
there.
Yeah, you can find me, and there's like one picture of me. Yeah, there was like one picture of me blended into some other pictures, and I wore number 25. And so on that thing, you can see a little guy, and you see the bat with a 25 like blended into the documents, right? But not my face. So anyway, I would point that out, and people be like, "Man, that ain't you. Can't even see your face." So this ring though came back, and it was like, "Oh, he wasn't
Wow.
lying. He really played on a championship college football team."
Wow. Well, we're going to cut to a quick
Yeah.
break, and then when we come back, we're going to hear more about the Lost Boyz. We hope you're enjoying the show, but wanted to make you aware that if you ever need to reach out to Alex or myself, you can certainly do so by emailing us at between@twostuds.com. And we'd be happy to hear fan mail, or if you want to suggest a guest, we'd be more than happy to entertain that. So hope to hear from you soon. And with that, we'll get right back to the show.
And welcome back to Between Two Studs. We're hanging out with LaVonte Stewart. He was just telling us his entire story, his upbringing, or at least part of his upbringing, which was super touching and a little emotional, but powerful. And, I appreciate you setting the stage because that background, that foundation that you came from, that you experienced, LaVonte, I think helps explain what happened next, where you became a community activist. You worked in political offices for some time. But what I'm really excited to talk to you about, what we're excited to chat with you about, is your work with Lost Boyz, which is, in the way I looked at it when I was reading about it, finding a way to keep kids active, safe, and off the streets. So you started this organization, what, 15 years ago?
Yeah, so 2008. So at the time, I had been a local Little League coach. So South Shore Little League had made a comeback for a couple of years, and I was coaching. It was the league I had grown up in. And then all of a sudden, it disappeared from the community for like 20 years. And I actually noticed this pattern around a lot of Black communities. Like all the Little League stuff started disappearing, and even to the point where strikeout boxes, were not on the back of buildings anymore, right? And that was like a staple thing, excuse me, that you saw in the community. And everybody played, boys, girls. You go in the store, get a 25-cent rubber ball. I'm getting old now. So balls, yeah, get a rubber ball for 25 cents from the grocery store or the
Inflation.
liquor store. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're probably like $5 now. But yeah, and even girls, right? And you didn't need a glove. If you had a glove, that was a bonus. But it was a rubber ball, so if you didn't have a glove, you could use your bare hands, and you play this stuff on concrete, whatever. So, anyways, um, I think I had my first son by this point, and his mom found this flyer for South Shore Little League in one of the stores, and she knew how I felt about sports because I was always talking about sport. In fact, when we had met and started dating, I was trying to play arena football. I was trying to come back to my football glory, and that didn't work out too well. But so I accepted that I'm no longer a stud and an athlete, and I'll go ahead and be a coach.
You're hanging out
So
and you're
There you
between
go.
two studs, though.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I'm feeling like
So
a
that makes
stud
you a
today.
stud by proxy, at least, right?
I love it. All right. Between three studs tonight. So So I start coaching in this league. First year I coach, I'm coaching 12U, 12 and under, 11 and 12-year-old boys. And the very first season, they just give me whomever the other teams didn't want. So I already started off with kind of a ragtag group, mostly that hadn't played. And I was so passionate about it, but it's my first time trying to coach. So we end up winning the league championship.
Whoa.
Right. I'm ecstatic, right? So I take this group, I really turn them around. They work their butts off. They get really good. And then we win the championship. And not in just regular fashion. It was all dramatic all the way through the playoffs. The team that should have won, we took them out.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I keep going for a couple of more seasons. Then all of a sudden, this guy, like in my third season, he folds the league, like out of nowhere. And no explanation, no nothing. And we knew that he had just like gotten a $30-something thousand grant from one of the local senators. So we're thinking like, dude, you got money. What's happening? So we never got any explanation. So I'm at the park with my
So
team
now
one
all
day.
these kids,
Yeah,
all these kids now have no
exactly. And this
little league
league
opportunity.
was serving probably like 200 and something kids at the time. So I'm practicing with my team, actually at the park, one of our main park that we still have now. And it's the middle of the afternoon, summertime. I'm explaining to them that, hey, the team is about to disappear. If you want to keep playing, I can get you over into one of our league mates in the district, like Jackie Robinson West or Southside Little League or Roseland Little League, one of these groups that's in our district. And before I could really fully explain that, we experienced a traumatic incident. So it's like two guys chasing another guy with a gun. I'm old school. I hit the dirt. The kids are like standing around laughing, talking about it, taking bets if he got them. Once they got past us
Wow.
a distance, we heard like a shot or two. So we don't know what happened though. But when I got up and I'm just looking at them, I just saw them in a whole different light right at that moment.
They were desensitized.
Exactly. You hit the word I was going to say. Kind of had this epiphany around them being desensitized to violence. And you hit it exactly right, Alex. And there was this overwhelming sense of guilt from the stuff I did when I was a teenager. I started thinking about like, okay, yeah, I wasn't Tony Montana, but what did I contribute negatively to the fabric of this community? What did I do that helped lead to this? And I just wanted to make it right. So, and I'm just telling myself, I'm like, oh my God, we're so lost in our community right now. These parents are lost, and this is why our kids are lost, and the connections are lost. And that was just how Lost Boyz was born. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I stopped the message, and it was just like, hey, yeah, we're going to practice tomorrow, but we're going to take on a new team name. So at the time, we were the Yankees. So now that we were no longer going to have this affiliation with South Shore Little League, I just became a barnstorming club, and I dipped back into the Negro leagues and turned us into the Black Yankees. And so I went to a local grocery store that had been around since I was a kid, and they were really nice. Middle Easterners owned the store, and they donated a bunch of, they had some Negro League New York hats, Black Yankees hats. And I'm like,
Oh,
wow,
wow.
okay. Right. So the black hats with the NY, belong back to them. So I'm like, all
Yeah,
right, this
yeah.
is it. So I got a bunch of those. Scrounged up some change, got some plain gray pants, told them to wear black long socks and wear a black t-shirt. And that was our initial uniform for the first season. And I also had,
Wow.
that was
Just
the
scraping it
first
together.
scraping it
But
together
the
and
kids are out
barnstorming.
there.
Right. And it was the early prelude to something I would later do in life that I didn't realize I was going to do, which was incorporate and be inclusive with girls. Albeit we do girls softball, but we also offer baseball. If they want to join a boys baseball team, that's fine. We've even talked about, creating all girls teams because there's a wonderful group, Baseball for All. Perry Barber, who is a longtime umpire, she's there. Dr. Justine Siegel is like the founder of it, or she plays a big part. She was she was the first women's coach in the MLB, Dr. Justine Siegel. So, anyways,
Oh.
I say that because I had a young lady on my team named Shay Shay, and she was a pitcher. I taught her how to pitch, and she was a beast. She was just out there striking boys out left and right, and it was so
That's
funny,
awesome.
right? Because she's kind of tomboyish, but then she could, dial herself up and actually look like a girl. So most of the times when she do that, then the jaws would drop because they're used to her looking like them with a ponytail tucked under the hat, roughhousing with the boys, and then all of a sudden she comes out in a
Right.
dress and her hair done, and they're like. So,
Oh.
anyways,
Yeah.
it was pretty cool, man. So our first year was awesome. Yeah, we're piecing it together. We're barnstorming. I'm just calling leagues up, trying to get a game, and then I came up with this name, Lost Boyz, because that thought I had, and no
Yeah.
affiliation to the excellent movie that I came up on. We're not vampires or none of that. But
Good call out.
I will say one of my favorite analogies that's come along, and I wasn't thinking about it until later, is the connection to Never Never Land, Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. And I like that one, so I like to say, yeah, I'm the modern day Black Peter Pan. I guess we can say that. And I got my
There you
Lost
go.
Boys
Love
and my
that.
Never Never Land. And it is true because I'm a big kid because of this. I haven't grown up. I haven't got a lot of gray hair yet. I'm only a couple of years from 50, and look at me, right? It's keeping me youthful. My friends always
Yeah.
tease me. They're like, "Where's your gray? I got all this gray. Where's yours?" Ask God. But
It's the
anyway,
kids.
yes, the kids,
Yeah.
It's the
dude. I truly
kids.
believe it. I truly believe it. It kept me athletic because you got to coach. You got to still do a lot of movement and da 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 da. But what was amazing about this journey is I just wanted to play some baseball in the beginning. I had no inclination. I wanted to create a nonprofit and make a whole organ. I just wanted to coach some good baseball because at this point I was a championship coach, so I wanted to keep going. Right? I was getting spoiled on championships, so
Yeah.
I I started doing paperwork to be able to solicit donations correctly. So that is
Mm-hmm.
what led me to forming a 501c3 organization. And then I
Mm.
had to stick a name, and Lost Boys stuck. And then it challenged me because it started asking about mission and vision and purpose. And I'm like, what is all this? I just want to play some baseball. So
Yeah.
as I started doing the research to figure out how should I word this stuff and what do I need to say, I challenged myself. And I mean, in that moment where we had that situation, it became bigger than baseball because immediately after that, I started seeing my kids right in that moment in a different light. I was seeing the ones whose clothes were unkempt, or I was seeing the one who was constantly asking, could I get him a burger from McDonald's? Or I was seeing all of this now. And I'm like, and then it made sense to me now why kids would come to practice angry, or why some didn't talk, or why, the different things that were interfering with them becoming good ball players. All that stuff started running through
Right.
my head at that moment. Um, and then it came back to me again as I'm doing all of this paperwork. And I saw a unique opportunity to do something different and special for these kids. And being the son of a teacher, it was natural for me, right? And I'm like, okay, they need some help with homework, or they need to just get out the neighborhood. So it started with really simple things, starting with some tutoring, starting by taking them down to Chinatown and having a sit down meal to expose them to the culture. And I just started
Wow.
adding pieces to it, and I started rewriting what I was doing. And so what I actually stumbled backwards into was a social science theory, a model or theory called sports based youth development, SBYD, which was derived
Oh.
from positive youth development, which was derived from human developmental theory. I didn't realize all of
Whoa.
this in,
Whoa. That's a lot of
yeah,
philosophy you just laid
a
on
lot of
us, or
acronyms.
psychology.
Yeah,
And it's tough because, like, I think one of the problems that you already hit on is that, like, as kids, especially if, like, you're not getting certain things, your defenses are up.
right,
Like, you're not going to say,
Right.
hey, Coach LaVonte, I didn't get a meal tonight. That's why I'm, like, a little bit angry
right,
or whatever. Like, you just don't hear that. And it's like,
right.
you've got to do the digging.
Yeah.
and you got to
And
work with the kid. But then once you get it, then the
you
kid will
get
start
right.
opening up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that was what was most critical to me in my learning in the process, right? Because I'd already been like every other American conditioned on these other precepts, writing kids off as just bad. Oh no, he's just a bad kid. Oh no, he's just a deviant. Oh no. And unfortunately, these were some of the perceptions that led to a lot of the inequities that obliterated my community to the point where it's at now, or communities that look like mine, right? And I'll give you a very quick reference. Crime bill, 1990s crime bill. Now, in retrospect, I'm able to look at that, and and I don't have a problem with him now as president, but he's backpedaled and apologized. Joe Biden had played a big part in that, right? And not to get too political here, but just saying the facts. They impacted my life. The reason I did all that time in prison for shooting a gun in the air was because of the impact of the crime bill. If that crime bill never existed, I never did a mandatory minimum 3 years, which led to 5 years in prison for shooting a gun in the air.
Well, and those are 5 critical years where you had a adult man who would have otherwise been part of a community who was behind closed bars instead.
Now, given I wouldn't have been the man anywhere near that I am now, maybe it was a good thing, because maybe what I would have been doing in those 5 years would have been more detrimental to my community than beneficial. So I'm not mad about it at all, right? Nobody owes me anything, nothing, right? I am the man who I am because of that part of my journey, right? I was forged in the fire through that and through many other things. It contributed, because when I really look back at it, that's where I started making programs, was in prison. I got a job. 2 of my best friends, white guys, they were from like outside of Kansas City, and God bless them. They are amazing guys. I'm still in contact with them today. Dan Como and Nathan Saucier, 2 wonderful guys who probably shouldn't have been in prison, either did some dumb stuff and ended up in prison. But it just so happens the good Lord I ended up in the cell with them. They became my cellmates. That, first of all, got me away from all of the other stuff that was waiting on me, because I was kind of fighting and all of that stuff, trying to connect with the gang culture. And then I got in there with those guys, and I started forgetting about it, because they had all these computer books and they were talking about Pascal and PC Xenu, and I'm like, what the hell is all of that? And they were like, we're learning how to program computers. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, here, you start with this book, A+.
We're gonna have to stop for 1 second, because you're getting into some really, I know we were talking during the break about technology and how you are a computer guy.
Let me try to bring it back.
Pascal, for anybody who doesn't know, Pascal is a legacy computer language, right? You've got shoot, I forget the term.
Well, don't date the man too much, Rob.
No, but I'm just saying,
legacy.
They are. They call legacy languages.
So there's a machine language, right? And then there's Pascal,
right?
And then since Pascal, you've got kind of like C++, and you've got some of these other languages, right? So, you're talking about languages with computers, and not to get too geeky here, but for 1 second, we'll just talk about it. Basically what you're doing, all these languages are really just to kind of work with the computer to say, hey, if you're doing A plus B, how you're trying to build logic circuits.
Right.
So for your friends and, for your friends that were basically hey, we're really trying to learn this programming language, that's pretty awesome to be doing that.
It was. And so I got into it with them, right? Because I'm in the cell all day. They got me a job with the Institutional Activities Coordinator, IAC. And he got them unprecedented access to computers. So now we started getting our hand on physical hardware and software and books.
And
I ain't got nothing else to do with my time.
This is in the mid-90s, right?
Yes. And so we're able to float around and move unlike any other inmate. And we're also the brains behind what activities are they getting to do. Yard pictures, ordering, real world food, we'll have a KFC day or a McDonald's day. And so if they have money on their books, they could pre-order stuff, or yard pictures. So we're the guys that took the pictures and then sold the picture packages and all that stuff. But in our spare time, when we were at work or back in the sales, we were reading those books. And then when we were in our office, we got to play with those computers all the way to networking. So I learned everything, like how to take a computer completely apart, reassemble it, how to do networking. And then I started learning how to program, or now what they call code, right?
Yep.
So that's what I ended up later in life because of Dan Como and Nathan Saucier. I ended up with a bachelor's degree in computer science and then a master's degree in computer science. And I became a computer programmer, but I didn't stay that very long because a black guy with degrees from Chicago State University competing against maybe an Asian guy from MIT or a white guy with a degree from Southern Cal, all of these better colleges, and I'm an ex-offender, nobody wanted to hire me. All they saw was he's a black guy that's an ex-offender and he's got a major X on there. Remember, armed criminal action is like an X offense in Illinois. Those are the ones that says you are horrible, you are scary, you are the biggest threat to our society when you have those kind of convictions. So on paper, nobody wanted to touch me, right? But it's funny because even that background ended up contributing to building Lost Boyz, because who did all of the computer-based stuff for Lost Boyz? Me.
You did.
So it's all foundational, LaVonte.
It's very foundational,
all building
incorporating
blocks.
all of the tech into it. But let me try to get back because I get lost in my own stories, digress.
Sure, sorry
I
for
love
going
it.
this a little off
No,
track.
I
it's
love
okay.
it.
So, my point was, in that, it led to some other opportunities. So the prison warden and the other folks in leadership, because then we ended up on the inmate council. So we were the voice for inmates with the prison staff.
Mm-hmm.
So we would express everything they want, everything they need. We deal with this situation, that situation. And it led to us talking about different kind of programming we needed. So I got to do 3 things that were really cool. One, they allowed me to develop a kind of robust sports program. So of course I put baseball back in there. We put in flag football, and we put in one more sport. We had to be careful with the flag football because they were like, tackling each other and
I can see where tackling can go really bad.
Yeah, so
in a hurry, especially if you got some beef to figure out.
Exactly.
Right?
So I got to do the sports stuff. That was cool, and I got to coach again and play baseball and football. But then we got to bring college to the prison. So we got to work with the local colleges, and I got to be a big part of that. And then when that happened, I started talking about the other programs we needed. So they let me develop a course around cultural enrichment. So I started studying psychology books and sociology books while I was in there in our library. And then I'd bring all these inmates together of different races, ethnicities, and we share music, we share literature.
Oh, that's so cool.
And then we talk about it, right? Like, well, why do you like this song? Why does it mean so much to you? So now, you got a country boy telling you,
why he likes Waylon Jennings, for instance.
Right? And then you have a black guy sitting there who's feeling them and feeling what he's saying and can connect with it. And now you get back in the sales later, and this black guy who's just playing all rap all day, Master P and Snoop Dogg. Now all of a sudden he's rocking some country music in the cell, right? Or vice versa. You come by the white guy's cell who's normally listening to country music, and he in there, listening to some Snoop and bopping, right? And so from that class, because there was also already a racial casting system in prisons, right? As soon as you get in there, black people go stick with black people, then that get further subdivided by gangs, and then white, da da da. So I got to do that.
Right.
That was really cool. And then the last one, which was major, we developed a whole new housing unit, and we used a model, and I helped really build this model out on a national level eventually, which was called therapeutic communities. So basically it was a fancy term for saying, hey, here's a peaceful housing unit where you can't fight, can't stab nobody, you can't do none of that, or you're going to get kicked out. But if you stay here and you abide by the rules, it's going to be heaven in the middle of hell. And that's what it was. They gave us an old gymnasium that was abandoned in there. and we
Yeah.
partitioned it off. And each group in the partition was called a family, and you had to create a family crest. You had family rules, and we did things together as a group, as a family, and we took care of each other. And again, the inmates got to have a council and select the other inmates that got to apply to come to that housing unit. And it was to the point everybody wanted to come there because you didn't have to worry about a fight. You didn't have to worry about getting stabbed.
Yeah.
You got to go to college. You got to do all kind of stuff once you got
It
up
was an
there, right? You got,
oasis.
yeah.
Right.
So that I said all that to say programming, I think creating programs and stuff was in my blood. And so I think that was a precursor before I even knew it to what I would end up doing with Lost Boyz. So yeah, so fast forward back to Lost Boyz. So we barnstorm it out the first year. I create the 501c3. I'm challenged. I start putting together little components on top of components on top of components. Each year I'm adding something new to what we're doing.
And we should be clear too, LaVonte. You started with 15 kids in 2008, right?
Yes.
And now, here, fast forward 2023, which I know I'm jumping a little bit, hundreds.
Right.
Right.
We serve
so
about 200 kids right now.
Whoa.
What a massive scale.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually,
I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to make sure people understood what this started out as versus what it became.
And we actually could have scaled to serve more, but I think because our programs are so robust and so intense and so granular in the lives of young people that it's more than about baseball. I always say that it's more than baseball, right? Like what baseball is to this country. It's more than the sport that it is. I always tell people, they say, why baseball? I said, because nothing is more American out of all of the sports than baseball. Nothing has contributed
baseball and apple pie.
There we go, baby.
Yep.
I was going to say it. Baseball and apple pie is what I always tell people. But nothing has contributed more to the fabric of American culture than baseball. I said everything that has played out in the country of America has happened in some form or fashion on that diamond. Whether you're talking about racial equality, gender equality, economic equality. You know, when the men went off to war, the women took the field, right? Which then let us know, hey, women can play sports too. Women don't just have to give birth and stay in the kitchen cooking, right? They can do what we can do, which eventually probably has contributed to leading to the feminism movement, right? So it's all kind of stuff. Economy.
Well, and one of the things you brought up earlier too, and I'm a big proponent of this, and I'm sure you're aware of the contact hypothesis. But for listeners, it's the idea that a lot of prejudice that exists is purely from a lack of exposure. So if you are white and you only know white people, and maybe you've had one experience with a black person, well, you're going to base your entire perception of what all black people are based on that one person that you had experience with. And if it was a bad experience, well, now you're casting a wide net, right? And so the way to really break down, this is what the whole contact hypothesis is, the way to break down a lot of prejudice and stereotypes is exposure to other backgrounds. And so when you think about baseball, once the integration occurred, right, Jackie Robinson, and it became, well, you know what? This is a meritocracy. The best person, I don't care what you look like, I don't care what you believe, we want you on our team, I think is symbolic in my mind, and maybe I'm a little bit of a hippie in saying this, of where I think we have the potential to go to. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
But I think baseball shows that potential of where mankind, where people could ultimately lead to eventually. And a lot of it has to do with, I love what you mentioned earlier, that small example of, hey, you know what? Kids from the South Side, we took them to Chinatown. And it's probably the first time there was like, what are these chopsticks? I'm sure there was probably confusion. And all of a sudden you go, oh, wait, they're just like us. They do things a little bit differently. We can learn from them and they can learn from us. And before you know it, you're breaking down those barriers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, my friend.
And just to add to that, I think that one of the things about baseball is there's so many metaphors that you can pull from it with just lessons about life. Like, you're not going to win every game, but you be respectful to the other team when they win, right? And sometimes, you go through those losing streaks where things don't go the way you want, but that's okay. That's one of those opportunities to figure out, what do we need to improve? How do we adjust? What are we missing? Maybe we need to do something with our training. Maybe we need to reposition players.
Right.
And I think that's one of those cool things about baseball is that, Alex and we've talked about baseball on our show before, but there's a lot of games, right? And whether you're playing, Little League or whether you're playing MLB, right? You're playing a lot of games.
Right.
And I think one of those lessons too, that I think one of those things that, it's kind of thrown at millennials is that everyone needs a participation trophy. Baseball is one of those types of games where it's like, yeah, you may not have made it, right? LaVonte's team did make it to the end and you got that championship. But you know what? That doesn't necessarily mean just because you didn't hit the championship that you're a bad team.
Right.
That there is something that you can take away and say, you know what? I'm not going to win that trophy every year, but you know what? I'm going to put my all into it. And that's life. That's a lesson in life that I think sports can teach.
Absolutely. Well said, Ron. And so that's what I ended up seeing too, right? Was that, hey, there are all these lessons. I mean, you can learn a lot from each sport. Don't get me wrong, right? But baseball is just a different thing. It's such a cognitive game compared to the others, and it has these moments where it's just slow and it's dull and it's potentially boring if you're not a huge fan of it. And you can just be standing still for 15 minutes and doing nothing. And then all of a sudden, for 30 seconds, there's all this action.
Bam.
And then again, boom, back nothing for 10 more minutes. Right. And so that's life, though. Right. Life is like that. It's not like a basketball court where you're just running the whole game or a football field. It's like baseball. You have these dull moments, these down moments. You have these moments where you're stuck in the field and you're trying to get that third out, and for some reason you can't get to that third out, or all of a sudden you go on a 2-out tear and you come back from a 6-run deficit, and that's life. One moment you didn't have a job, you didn't know how you were going to pay this bill, and I think I was telling you all about that in between the breaks, where I didn't experience poverty until I was an adult with children, which was the worst time to experience it because I got kids and their mom looking up to me, and all of a sudden the lights are off, and I got to send a drug addict up a line to illegally turn my lights on until I can afford to pay the bill again, because I can't leave my kids sitting in the dark. And then when the lights come back on, just the moment of how they're looking at me, but it's a happy look because the lights are on. But in my head, I'm like, what do they think of me? Dad can't even pay the light bill. What kind of man am I? So life is that. And, now fast forward, my life is fine, right? I'm okay. I can afford every single bill and then some, and I can have enough to help other folks. My children are doing well. They've paid for college. My son is in private high school, like my parents gave me. So, those were moments. That was an inning you can get out of. You can get out of that rut. So, and we went from just these informal little life lessons you can take out of baseball to things that were very, very more intentional and connected along these learning spectrums. So we ended up focusing on about 5 or 6 developmental areas of young people's lives. And all of this stuff is scientifically sound modeling and theories that it's based on. It is very evidence-based and data-driven at this point, too. So, sports-based youth development, I came finally across it. I didn't have a name for what I was doing until I was doing my thesis for my second master's degree, which is in public administration from DePaul University in 2014, 2015. So that was kind of recent, within the last 8 years or so, was when I figured out the name of what I was doing. And it was crazy because I was trying to describe what I was doing with Lost Boyz in this body of work for school. And so when I got to the literature review and I'm just trying to figure it all out, and I'm going through, hundreds of papers
Yeah.
written already in books. I finally stumbled across it thanks to an organization called Up to Us. Uh, and I started studying some of the white papers, and then that led me down a rabbit hole of information. So that's what I was doing, and I didn't know it had a name, but it existed since maybe the late
Wow.
80s, early 90s. It hadn't really taken off like people thought. And so I think in the last 5 to 7 years, because of being connected to Laureus USA, which is the largest convener and supporter of sports-based youth development around the world, right? They have model cities in America. There's Chicago. It started in New Orleans. New York has one. Atlanta, and now LA. These are the model cities. But then you got London, New Delhi, Johannesburg. And so every 2 years, I get to meet up with all these folks, and we do a global
That's
summit.
incredible.
Yeah, and I get to be
That's
around
awesome.
people that's like me that use all kind of different sports for all kind of reasons, whether it's, you know, women in South Africa who are using boxing to help girls with the
Yeah.
toxic masculinity there, where they're mutilating women's genitals, and, you know, men are snatching and raping women like it's nothing, like it's a drinking game, horrible atrocities that you could not even fathom happening in America. And they're using sport to combat that stuff, right? Or you got people using
Yeah.
surfing in New Zealand. It's just amazing what people are doing with sport around the world for youth. And so, yeah, I found
Yeah.
my niche. I found my home in this. I've become a national voice of it. And so we put the spotlight on sport-based youth development in the last 7 years, and it's really blown up now. And we've got a lot of major athletes who are gravitating to that message, like Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka. We're trying to get Marcus Stroman on board as an ambassador. For the first time, I met Michael Johnson. He's a board member of
Ooh.
Laureus, and Edwin Moses, and these are, Black
Wow.
Olympians, and
That's
Missy
really cool.
Franklin, who handed me the Laureus Sport for Good Award, which we won, I think, last year or year before last, with only the second Chicago group to ever win that award. The first one was the Chicago Cubs. So I was handed this award by Missy Franklin and Tom Ricketts at Wrigley. It should have been an event
Whoa.
in Madrid, Spain, or Morocco, but because of COVID, we couldn't have the in-person award ceremony. So I was kind of pissed about that, right? I was going to go to Spain and receive this
As you
award.
should be.
Yeah, but instead
Yeah.
it's the middle of the winter, and we got on skull caps, and we're Wrigley shaking, and the video is out there too. And I get the award from Tom Ricketts, who, by the way, Tom, I hope you hear this, because I'm still waiting on that meeting so you can help me build that $1 million facility here. But yeah, so my
Amazing.
life has been beautiful because of Lost Boys. It has enriched and benefited my life, I think, just as much, if not more, of what it has done for the youth that we serve. And it has absolutely benefited the adults who have been the staff. What I love the most about it is when you put in like 16 years of this, kids who were 12, 10 years ago are now 22. And so my
Mm.
former players are now the staff. They're the coaches. They're the program coordinators. They're the mentors. They're the this. They're the that. And so I think that gives me the most gratification, is because it wasn't just a one. It wasn't just. I remember how important coaches, what important role they played in my life, and how I still remember all of my coaches, and I can talk about them and tell the stories of what they did for my life. And so that was important for me too. But the fact that they're back as adults and they're working in it and they're
Yeah.
putting their kids in it is becoming
Mm.
generational. And that is, what drives me and motivates me every day. And like all of my children have been through Lost Boys programming. Two of my daughters, and they play softball. I coach one in high school because I still coach high school softball as well. And they work at Lost Boys. One is a financial administrator, one is a program coordinator in the team program, and then my son is coming into his last year of finishing the program, and he'll go off to college and get hired and come back as a coach. But to watch my son
So cool.
coach one of the teams that he played on, that I coached him on, because I coached him on about 3 teams through Lost Boys, and so to watch him
Mm-hmm.
coach the 8, 9, 10-year-olds It's hard to keep the tears back just watching my son, and he's passionate,
Yeah.
he's knowledgeable, he's an awesome baseball player. He's going into his senior year at De La Salle Institute, varsity baseball. We're really proud of him, hoping he makes the collegiate team. But just watching that, even if he never plays ball again, I'm happy. I'm satisfied as a dad to have seen his journey and to have been a part of it. And the same with all of these other kids that are not my kids, because they are my kids too, right? I'm a father of
Right.
few, of four, but I'm really a father of many. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that, right? And now that's changing into being a grandfather of many. Because, like I said, all of them, even the ones that didn't come back to work, they're still coming back as adults and bringing their kids back to the program. Like they'll see
Yeah.
me and they're like, "You still coaching baseball? Yeah. You still at the same part? Yeah. Oh, I'm bringing my son up
Yeah.
there to join the program. Or I'm bringing my daughter." And so, it's just amazing. And we've gotten deep into what we're doing with the family. So we've gotten really invested, really deep into what we're doing. We've created more programming uh, that doesn't even involve playing baseball, but it's still kind of connected to baseball. So youth can come and work, and they mentor youth, and whether they coach or whether they learn the background of the sport and they work as support in other ways, like umpires or administrators or whatever, they're getting those opportunities. And now I'm even going back to my roots of what happened to me with the criminal justice system, and I'm tapping back into that because it's always been a place in my heart. So I have a very special program for court involved youth, and we just secured our first apartment that we have youth living in who don't have stable home environments, and they've
Wow.
caught cases and stuff like that. So now they
Yeah.
got programming. I've given them somewhere to live. We've got a nice luxury apartment um, that they shared apartment space, and one of the staff persons lives there with them. And now we know they're safe. They don't have to couch
Yeah.
surf from friend to friend's house or wherever, and they can focus on school. They can focus on working with us and make some money and just get themselves together. So Lost Boys has evolved in a lot of ways
Yeah.
into something
Clearly.
more. It's become an economic engine, right? We started out with almost no money, a couple of volunteers, like Coach Smith is, my main person. Now she's my COO. Uh, but now we're almost at like a $2 million budget. We have multiple city sites. Um, we have 3 programs now, and we're talking about expanding or replicating in New Orleans. So now we're talking about going national.
Oh, wow.
So
Expansion
yeah,
into a whole nother city.
yeah. And so we have a
Wow.
staff of about 26 adults, and then we have another 26 youth. So my payroll is 52 people, and my payroll is about $90,000 a month. So
Whoa.
not bad for a boy from the South Side who had been written off as an ex-offender. Nobody, almost unwilling to give me chances, but those who bet on me, they made the right bets, and just kind of wrote my own way. And now that's just what I want to impart to other folks is, don't give up on yourself. Don't listen to what other people have to say about you. Uh, like I love Rocky movies. I love Rocky movies because they're so American. They're so motivational. Philly is another city I've been targeting. I was talking to Meek Mill about it and trying to bring. I was with Meek Mill in New York. Long story, but
Yeah.
one thing that I love Rocky movies, and the one thing I love that Rocky says uh, in the one he's fighting, and he says, "Hey yo, I ain't hear no bell," And I think he was talking to Tommy right after he trained Tommy up, and
Yeah.
but
That was 5, right? Rocky 5.
I think
Yeah, it
so.
was.
It was
Yeah.
five, yeah, because 4 was the Russian. So
4 is the Russian. Yeah.
I think I love that statement because that summarizes my life, right? At all the moments when I was down and I could have stayed down and just counted it over, it was just like I heard that in my head all the time. Yo, I ain't heard no bell ring. And then the other one, get up, you bum, because Mickey loves you, right? So it's like those two things, man. I like so
Well,
American.
and LaVonte, everything as you were telling this story, all I could think about, and I don't mean to quote Shawshank Redemption, but the importance of hope.
Right.
Hope is a good thing. And when, as you mentioned, it's not just about baseball. Baseball is just a catalyst, right? People get
Yes.
excited about baseball, and then it builds off of that,
That's
right?
right.
And exposure to the rest of the world, and knowing that, hey, whatever the status quo in your life is, no matter what's occurring, no matter the poverty, the discrimination, what have you, there is options presented to you. I think that is such a powerful message that I think everyone needs to hear time and time again. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, I went on your website and
Which
88.
let's call that out real quickly. It's for those that are interested, lostboysinc.org. And we will put
Yes.
a link
Oh, for
obviously
sure.
for the web when we post this.
But it's interesting because you conducted a survey, your organization, and 88% of parents surveyed agreed that Lost Boys help prevent their child from becoming a victim of youth violence. I mean, that is an incredible story to tell on its own, right? And
Right.
exactly what you just said, these 10-year-olds that you were teaching a game to in 2008, well, now they're in their mid 20s, right?
Right.
And so to see these people grow up, to come back to the neighborhood, to want to continue to give back. We kind of started a little bit of this show talking about the history of you and coming out of the crack epidemic of the 80s and seeing this return. You tell me if you disagree, but I think there was a time where if you were to make it from these tough neighborhoods, you didn't want to come back. You wanted to get away. And
Right.
now for people to say, you know what? No, I've made it and I want to help out the next generation. What a powerful message and story for everybody to hear.
Absolutely. And I'll say this kind of as we're closing. It's always tough. There are always new challenges. This kind of work, and similar work, initially it doesn't seem rewarding, but man, it really overall is rewarding when you look back at it and bigger picture stuff. And again, there are tons of challenges. Like the closest, most recent challenge is my 17-year-old son was shot back in May. Fortunately,
Oh,
he survived. He's okay. No serious medical things. And he was in the house, and a bullet came through our door while he was answering the door to get DoorDash. And I had a moment because it was like, F the world, screw the world. I'm ready to kill everybody. This is my son with my same name. And I had a moment like, man, this is what I get, God. All this sacrifice, all this and that, just for this to happen. And this is what I've been trying to prevent his entire life. And then it happens in the house. But I think, again, it's one of those moments like the return of my ring and like so many other parts of my story where it's just a moment that takes me to a whole new level. And so I think for me, it takes me to a new commitment level because what I got out of it is if I've kind of become even semi important to the city, for that to happen to me, what I told our new mayor and everybody else who's been listening, and when I went on media to do it, the point was if I'm a beloved person in the community and something like this could still happen to me, I can pick up the phone and make all kind of calls and get all kind of resources. And we're great.
yeah.
What chance does the average person have, right? They can't pick up the phone and call the attorney general or call Arnie Duncan or call this person or call that person, or they can't dip into their bank account and just say, hey, we're moving next week, right?
Yeah.
So from that, I've been working to bring more attention again to the services that are available for families that are victims of gun violence from that. So each iteration in my life, there's something new that just drives me and pushes towards a new point. But we're happy with Lost Boys and where it's at. It's starting to grow. Hopefully, it's going to spread a little bit more across the nation. We're hoping that it catches on. We're hoping New Orleans. We're hoping maybe Philadelphia. So
And
we'll
Atlanta.
see. Atlanta. Well, we got Lead in Atlanta. You got to check out Lead, Ron. Look them up. In
Sure.
fact, you all should have CJ and Kelly Stewart, the founders, on the show one day. I can connect you. CJ is a former
Awesome.
Love
Chicago.
that.
He's a former Chicago Cub, but he's born and raised in Atlanta, and he's doing exactly what we're doing in Chicago, but even better, probably in Atlanta with Lead and with his ambassadors. And he's putting far more young men into collegiate baseball and pro baseball than I've ever have. But they are an amazing power couple down there in Atlanta. So check them out. LEAD, Lead Atlanta. Look them up. Check them out. Probably go visit them. I think they're down in Bankhead. I'm learning the city now. Old Fourth Ward, all that stuff. I'm starting to learn the city. But
Yeah.
yeah, amazing group. So if you ever want them on, let me know. And other than that, to your listening audience, yeah, we got to get you all a couple of more some cool baseball guests. So we're gonna try to work on a couple of
Oh,
surprises.
we would love that. But Levante,
Right.
most importantly of all, for anyone listening right now, how can they support Lost Boys?
That's a great question, Alex. And typically, nonprofit leaders are going to tell you can donate, you can volunteer, you can do this. But I'm going to tell your listeners something different. You want to support us and you want to support Lost Boys, go support your local community. Go down to a part of your city where you don't normally go and find a baseball program or any other kind of sport program, anything where there are youth, and donate to them. Donate your time, donate your money there. I got enough money. I don't need any more. But what we need, period, in this country, especially with kids, is just more love. And not just love
That
from their
is
family, just
that
love
is
from
so
people. We got to love on each other as Americans because we are living in, I'm not going to say an unprecedented time, but we're on the precipice of times that have not been good for our country when it has gotten like this before. World War II, Nazis, you know, we can go back in all the bad eras, Jim Crow. We can talk about all the bad things that happened in the country, but we always see these lead ups, these mashups of people, and this madness that's happening among people before we see something really bad happen. In America, we've got to turn this around. We got to quit fighting each other over politics, over race, over wealth inequities. We just got to love on each other, man, because this is the greatest country in the world, and we've got to prove that to ourselves and to everybody else.
so true. What I was going to say that kind of reminded me of what the Lost Boys is doing as well too is Girl Scout Troop 6000. My daughter's a Girl Scout, and Girl Scout Troop 6000 is a troop based out of New York City for homeless kids. And I think one of the biggest things that kids get from like your organization or that organization is an identity, a sense of I belong, I have a
Yes,
place. And for kids, I think that's one of those things that we miss out on. Like, they're kids, they're just off in that park. But, until you get to know the kid, you don't know what's actually going on in their life, what's going on in their home. They
right.
put up their defenses, as we talked about. And if you go out to your local community, you get to find those people, those kids, help them to feel like they belong, that they have a place and they have value. That's what we need, I think, as a country, is for people to really feel, the youth are our future. And if the youth don't have that sense of purpose, of value, that's where we're going to have problems. So that's where I love what your organization is doing, because that's where kids will take that. They'll go out and they have that feeling of pride. And then for
Yes,
them to come back 10, 20 years later and say, this is how I'm going to help my community.
yes,
That is solid. So wonderful.
it is. Well, guys,
Levante,
thank you for having me.
a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time for sharing your personal story and the organization that you've helped create. that has affected hundreds of lives. So thank you again. Keep up the great work, and we hope to have you on in the future as well.
For sure.
Anytime.
And with
Let me know. I'll be here.
All right.
And
Thank
with
you so
that-
much.
I think we'll call it the episode. So thank you for listening. Have a good one.
Thank you, guys.